Hello, today we're going to talk about demand. Demand is the desire, the willingness, and the ability to buy a good or service. So, what this means is that you need to be able to make a check next to these three things. You must want to buy something, you must be willing to buy it, and have the resources to buy it. Now you might be saying, Mr. Robillard, what is the difference between wanting to buy something and being willing to buy something? I would love to buy um, a very fancy car, right? I'd love to buy a pretty fancy car, maybe like a new Mustang. But I'm not willing to pay the money. Like I could, right, of the resources. I want to, but I'm not quite willing to spend that money. That is the difference between want and willingness. Market demand is the total amount of demand created by all consumers for a product. So it's the total amount demanded by all consumers. So maybe if the classroom um, represents all the consumers, you can figure out what the demand is for all the consumers combined, right? We just count them up. So a demand schedule is a table that lists the various quantities of product that will be bought at a different price. So for example, on our chart here, if you're going to sell a small soda for 25 cents, we could expect 890 people would be willing to buy it, or they'd have a demand for it. 50 cents each, 500 people. It goes all this demand schedule goes all the way up to $2.75, at which price we could expect about 100 people to purchase. Right? So this demand schedule just gives you a list of prices and the quantity demanded at that specific price. On your paper, go ahead and fill in um, a mock demand schedule. Your paper says for video games, but you can make this a demand schedule for anything. So pick something that's roughly about $40 or $30 and make a demand schedule. I'd recommend putting something like 1 here, put a 1 here, 5, 8, 12, 15, and 10. Or, excuse me, not 10, 25. This will give you a nice line. We're eventually going to plot this onto a graph, and it shows how people are more willing to buy things when there's a lower cost. A demand curve, it's kind of like a demand schedule, but instead of being on a table, it's going to be a graph like you would find in algebra class. This graph will show the amount of a product that we bought at any possible price. So on your graph, go ahead and chart the points you made from your demand schedule. If you did it properly, your graph, you should start up here somewhere, right? Because at a very high price, no one would buy it. And your line should be moving some way in this direction, alright? If you need extra help plotting your points and making your graph properly, please be sure to raise your hand so I can address you. Alright, the direction of the demand curve, if you did it right, will always go down because as the cost of a good goes up, demand goes down. So if there's a high demand, there's a low price. And if there's a high cost, there's a relatively low demand. However, or I should say in addition, the law of demand states that very same thing. As price goes up, the quantity demanded, the number demanded goes down, right? We need to know that. The word utility refers to the amount of satisfaction or happiness or usefulness a product gives you. It turns out that the more we use a product, the less you're going to enjoy using it. Many people, or the example I'm going to give you, um, is maybe a new pair of shoes, right? You first get that new pair of shoes, you're happy with them, they look good on the outside, they're nice and supportive for your feet, right? They're cool. Um, but maybe 6 months, a year and a half goes by, they're not as clean, they're not as supportive anymore, they start to wear out. The more you use that shoe, the less you like it. We could talk about, I think we talked about the water example a few classes ago, where we had a very thirsty man, a moderately thirsty man, and a man who is not thirsty at all. The more you drink water, the less you're going to enjoy drinking water, right? Because at some point you're going to have had enough, right? This is called diminishing marginal utility. So there are 5 things that will shift the demand curve. These are 5 things that can change demand. The number of buyers, right? So a change in population. If many people start moving to Ashburn, more people are going to start demanding or having a demand for houses or apartments, right? If population increases, so will demand. Income. The more people earn, the more likely they're willing to spend. Tastes, right? A change in popularity or a fad. If something becomes overwhelmingly popular, more people are going to demand it because it is popular, right? Like AirPods are a great example. Expectations, so feelings about the future. If you think something will be worth a lot in the future, you might demand it more. If you think something will be more valuable or will make you look cool, these are all things that could increase or lower demand. Related goods. So substitutes are goods that can replace others, right? Goods that can easily replace others. For example, a Nike branded shoe versus an Adidas branded shoe. Maybe instead of Coke, you drink Pepsi. Instead of Sprite, you drink 7 Up. Any good that is easily substituted with another. See if you could think of some examples by yourself. On the other hand, there are also complements. So these are goods that go along well with another. If there's a complement, that means that as the demand for one good goes up, the demand for the other also goes up. One example a student said was hot dogs and hot dog buns, right? As the demand of hot dogs goes up, maybe in the summer, so does the demand of hot dog buns, right? Because those two objects usually go together. Peanut butter and jelly, cookies and milk, all these kinds of things go together well, like cell phones and cell phone chargers or pop sockets. Things that go together. If demand for one good goes up, demand for the other will go along with it. If one of these detriments to demand end up lowering demand, well, on your graph, it will end up being moved to the left. On your graph, it will end up being moved to the left. Things that decrease demand, move it to the left. On the other hand, things that increase demand, maybe an increase in the population, they're going to shift your demand curve to the right. Demand elasticity refers to how much demand for a product is affected by the change in price. So here is perfectly inelastic demand. This means that if it's perfectly inelastic, it means the quantity sold will not change depending on the price. In the real world, we really don't see a demand curve looking like this. However, you could predict maybe if you had to pay for air that you breathe, it doesn't matter how much you're going to be charged for it. You would pay. Because if you don't, you would die. Right? So maybe air would be something that would be perfectly inelastic demand. Again, we don't really see perfectly inelastic demand in the real world too often, but some goods are more inelastic than others. Here's an example of perfectly elastic demand. The price does not change no matter the quantity sold. Again, not really easy to make a real life example out of, but if we were to make an example of an elastic demand and inelastic demand on a graph, it would look something like this. So this line here, this is our elastic demand line. As you can see, our x-axis is the quantity. The quantity has changed as a result of the change in price. It's been a big quantity change as a result in price. Over here on this line, though, you will see a big change in the price. However, the quantity is roughly the same. Alright, on the next couple of slides, an image will appear. When the image appears, think to yourself if you believe the demand will be elastic, meaning the amount of people who want it will change greatly based off of the cost, or inelastic, right? It doesn't matter, people would still want to buy it even at a pretty high price. Alright, so this is medicine. Do you think medicine would be inelastic or elastic? If you guessed inelastic, you are right. People do not want medicine. People need medicine. Because they need it, it's going to have inelastic demand. How about a fancy turkey dinner? A fancy turkey dinner. If you guessed elastic, you would be correct. You don't need this fancy turkey dinner to live. However, it is a nice luxury. Oil. This one might be tricky, but oil has relatively inelastic demand. It turns out people don't really change their driving habits until gas gets up to about $4.50 to $5. At least here in the United States. At the $4.50 per gallon mark, we start to see a pretty big change in people's driving behavior. In other words, even when gas prices are high, the demand for it remains higher than people would usually expect. Alright, so the things that can affect elasticity. The percentage of income. If you were going to charge an additional $100 on a house, that will not change someone's willingness to buy it, right? It'd be very unlikely to change someone's willingness to buy it because houses are hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? What's $100 compared to the hundreds of thousands of dollars that are being spent? So that makes houses inelastic with their demand. The availability of substitutes. How easy is it to get something that replaces it, does the job just as well? If the price of Coke was going to double or triple, I guarantee you people would just switch to drinking Pepsi. Different flavors, sure, but ultimately they're a very similar product. If a substitute is readily available, the elasticity will be great. If a substitute is not readily available, the elasticity would be very inelastic, right? Is the item a necessity or a luxury? If you need the item to live, the demand will be inelastic. If it is a luxury, it will be elastic. And the length of time the item is available. If the item was always available, you could get it whenever you want, you're going to have very elastic demand. However, if it's inelastic, if you could only get this item at this particular time, people are going to be willing to pay more than they would otherwise, right? The increase in price will not change demand too much. It will change, but not too much. This is why concert tickets or sporting tickets to see the event live, right? It's the only time that event will be happening live at that time. It's going to make the price quite high. Alright, that is our video for today. Again, if you have questions, let me know. You do need to know all of this for our upcoming test. So be sure you have all the notes written down and be sure, more importantly, that you understand every concept involved. Thank you for your time. Have a nice day.